It was supposed to be the happiest day in their lives, where a billionaire groom and a fashion heiress would unite two empires in a wedding streamed across the globe. But just as the priest lifted his hands to bless the union, the lights flickered. The massive screen behind him, meant to show a slideshow of love, glitched once, then displayed something that stopped time, a birth certificate. And when the names came into focus, everything they believed about love, blood, and legacy shattered. What was hidden for decades was now public, and this wasn't just a ruined wedding. It was the beginning of a truth no one was ready for. Stay with this story, because by the time we reach the end, you won't just question love. You'll question everything we inherit when we're born. The sun poured golden streaks through the glass dome of Trinity House Cathedral, nestled on the exclusive enclave of Banana Island. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a summit of dynasties. Outside, security drones hovered in silent arcs above the gated venue, scanning guest badges and media drones with military precision. Inside, roses flown in from Marrakesh lined the aisle in blooming spirals, and violinists tuned their instruments in a crescent arch beneath floating light orbs. The scent of oud, imported from Dubai, hovered like memory over the marble altar. This was Brandon Hall's wedding, the tech sovereign whose Halltech ventures redefined digital infrastructure across West Africa. A man who rose from adoptive shadows in Atlanta to command attention from Forbes, Bloomberg, and every global entrepreneur under 40. Today, he wasn't launching another startup or hosting another innovation summit. He was marrying Savannah Monroe, daughter of global fashion moguls and heiress to the Monroe luxury group empire. Their story had the sheen of cinematic perfection. A chance encounter at a TEDx Lagos panel on generational wealth led to a heated debate, which turned into collaboration. Then, somewhere between the second midnight flight and the first stolen kiss, became love. Their engagement announcement on Instagram broke algorithms, attracting millions of reactions in minutes. Now, they stood at the precipice of forever. Brandon adjusted his emerald cufflinks, each bearing the Hall insignia, a phoenix wrapped in code. His breath caught as Savannah entered the cathedral, framed by arched stained glass and beams of soft light. She glided forward in a hand-beaded gown designed exclusively by Ife Agbaje Couture, her veil woven with thin strands of platinum thread. Gasps filled the cathedral. Even the priest paused. Everyone was there. Billionaires from Johannesburg, tech moguls from Nairobi, ambassadors, poets, royalty. Nollywood icons clinked champagne glasses with oil executives. Photographers lined the edge of the aisle, capturing what was meant to be the most beautiful beginning of all. A low hum began, an orchestral crescendo announcing the ceremony. The priest, robed in white with gold trim, lifted his hand in blessing as Brandon and Savannah joined hands at the altar. Behind him, a 50-foot LED screen prepared to display a curated love montage. Baby photos, holiday clips, drone shots of their Paris proposal atop a glass skyscraper. But then, the lights flickered. Once, twice. The violinists stopped playing. A sudden draft moved through the air-conditioned cathedral, as if the building itself had gasped. Savannah's eyes darted upward. Brandon tilted his head. On the screen behind the priest, the elegant slideshow interface stuttered. It blinked away, replaced by a black console-like window. Lines of white text scrolled past, too fast to read. Guests murmured. Someone whispered, "Is this part of the show?" It wasn't. The interface disappeared, and in its place, a birth certificate loaded in crystal-clear resolution. The room went silent. Names appeared. Name of child, Brandon Elijah Hall. Date of birth, August 19th, 1993. Place of birth, St. Catherine's Private Medical Center, Boston. M.A. Mother, Angela Clarice Monroe. Father, unlisted gasps rang out like thunder. Savannah's head whipped toward her mother, Angela Monroe, seated in the front row, draped in custom Bantu silk. Her face drained of all color. Her jeweled clutch dropped from her lap to the marble floor with a sharp clink. Brandon's lips parted, but no sound came out. His pupils dilated, His breathing faltered. Angela Monroe stood, shaking slightly, grabbing the pew for balance. Charles Monroe, Savannah's father and chairman of Monroe Luxury Group, rose slowly beside her, his jaw locked, his fists curled. But he said nothing. The priest turned toward the screen, mouth slightly open. Behind him, the sacred digital altar continued to display the certificate. Guests were now on their feet. Phones came out. Some were streaming. Some were crying. A distant voice in the crowd said, "Is this real?" Savannah took one step back. Just one. Her hand loosened from Brandon's. Her lips trembled. "No, this can't be," she whispered. Brandon blinked as if waking from anesthesia. "Angela Monroe is your mother?" I don't know what this is," Savannah muttered, but her voice betrayed her. She did know. The priest stepped forward. The ceremony book fell from his hands and hit the marble with a soft thud. He turned slowly, faced the screen, and then the couple. "This is not a technical error," he said grimly, voice echoing through the cathedral's acoustics. "Someone planned this." And just like that, the wedding of the century shattered before the world. There were gasps, then screams, then silence so sharp it cuts through every inch of the cathedral. The LED screen zooms in, highlighting the one line no one could explain. Mother, Angela Clarice Monroe. Not just Savannah's mother. Now also Brandon's. Angela Monroe's hands tremble. Her lips part, but nothing escapes. Dignified, private, always composed. Angela had built an empire behind the scenes of her husband's fashion conglomerate. Her presence was felt, never heard. Until now. Her diamond earrings swayed like accusations as she stared at her daughter and the man Savannah was about to marry. Brandon's back straightened, as if pierced by invisible arrows. Behind him, his longtime mentor and Haltech co-founder, Gregory Deaton, leaned in and whispered in a voice only he could hear, "This is war. Someone wants your empire shattered today." And they just fired the first shot. Across the rows of pews, phones were already out. A few hands still trembled, unsure whether to record history or respect the dead silence of shock. But not everyone hesitated. From the far right corner, seated among the Nollywood A-listers, sat a woman in a bronze pantsuit. She wasn't dressed like the others. No diamonds, no lace, just confidence and a camera. She was Tanya Bright, a rising documentary filmmaker with a knack for finding stories inside of storms. And right now, her live stream was trending in 57 countries. Angela turned toward Charles Monroe, who hadn't moved since the screen lit up. The titan of Monroe luxury stood like stone, except for the flicker of his eye, scanning the reactions, calculating consequences. He wasn't angry about the truth. He was angry about timing. Savannah finally found her voice. "Mum, is this true? Tell me it's a hack." Angela took one step forward. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Not here. Not like this." But it was too late. The narrative had already escaped the cathedral. Online theories bloomed like wildfire. Is Savannah marrying her brother? Who is Brandon Hall, really? The Monroe legacy, a lie? Security approached the altar. Coordinators rushed in. Bridal emergency evacuation protocols, never meant to be used, were suddenly being enforced. Brandon and Savannah were ushered through a discreet side staircase behind the choir loft, up into a private suite overlooking the cathedral garden. Neither spoke. Their fingers still touched occasionally, but the intimacy that brought them to the altar now felt radioactive. Savannah collapsed onto the edge of a velvet ottoman, hands covering her face. Her veil was torn from the frenzy. Brandon stood at the window, his silhouette sharp against the evening sun. "Do you think I knew?" he asked softly, his voice not accusing, just broken. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because somewhere deep inside, Savannah knew her mother had always carried a sadness she couldn't name, a silence that never broke, even when everything else did. Downstairs, Angela requested to speak with them, alone. Charles, still unmoved in the aisle, snapped, "No, you've said enough without saying anything. Now you want privacy?" His voice was calm, but it sliced through the room like glass through silk. Angela turned to him, voice steadier now. I have nothing to lose. Any more, Charles. And neither do you. Security hesitated, then stepped aside as Angela ascended the side staircase. The hallway outside the suite was lined with white roses and silent, anxious planners. Inside, Savannah sat rigid. Brandon remained near the window. Angela entered, alone. Her eyes lingered on Brandon for a moment, long enough to say 1,000 unsaid things. She didn't start with an apology. She didn't cry. She looked straight at Savannah and said, "You were always meant to replace someone." The words hit like a bullet through glass. Savannah's throat tightened. Replace who? Angela didn't answer right away. She moved to the antique dresser near the suite's vanity, her hands grazing a jewelry box she had gifted Savannah just that morning. Then she sat. I was 20 when I came to Boston. I was alone, scared, but I had hope, and I had you, she said quietly. Only, you weren't supposed to be mine. Brandon finally turned away from the window. His eyes met Angela's. What does that mean? Angela inhaled deeply, as though retrieving air from a decade ago. There was another. Before all of this. Before Charles, before wealth, before media and fabric lines and curated lives, she said. And I had to give him up. Not because I wanted to, but because I was told I had no choice. Savannah's voice cracked. So Brandon is my brother? Angela's lips parted, then closed again. I don't know. That's the truth. I carried him. I gave birth. And then I was told he died. That there was a complication. I buried a box. I lit a candle. And I never asked again. Brandon took a step forward. You're saying I might be the son you thought died? Angela nodded. Slowly. Painfully. No, Brandon whispered. That's not possible. I've been alone my entire life. Foster care. Adoption. Record sealed. You're telling me I was born into this? And thrown out? Angela's voice rose, sharper now. I didn't throw you out, Brandon. I buried a lie someone else wrote. I lived with it. Every single day. Savannah sat back, her body drained of its poise. So who was I meant to replace? Angela looked at her daughter with eyes full of years and regret. The one I lost. Brandon's breath left him. The room sat in silence. Outside, the cathedral grounds were nearly empty now. The roses had begun to wilt. Guests had been escorted to waiting cars, told to stay silent until press statements could be crafted. But inside that suite, 3 people sat surrounded not by luxury, but by the collapsing walls of truth. And for the first time, Savannah was no longer sure if she had been raised in love or in replacement. Angela didn't cry. Her voice didn't waver. She sat in the quiet of the private suite, her hands folded as if holding something sacred, or perhaps something already broken. Outside, Banana Island had gone silent. The gates were closed, the paparazzi kept at bay, the world left waiting. But inside, history was unfolding, spoken in hushes and truths too long buried. I was a painter, Angela began. Sacramento, 1990. I had a studio over a pawn shop. My dreams were bigger than my meals. I was 21, and I had nothing, except a name I refused to let die with my hunger. Brandon leaned against the far wall. Savannah stayed seated, eyes wide and still. Neither of them breathed too loudly. Angela continued. I was offered a chance. A man and a woman. They had wealth, legacy, desperation. She couldn't carry a child. He couldn't bear the thought of not having an heir. Savannah's voice, barely a whisper. Charles? Angela nodded slowly. Yes, Charles Monroe. But back then, he wasn't the Monroe we know today. He was still climbing, still ruthless, still married to a woman named Celeste, a political heiress from a New England dynasty. Brandon stepped closer. The one who died. Angela tilted her head. That's what he told me, that she died in a crash just months before Savannah was born. But I never saw a body, never read an obituary. So you agreed to carry their child? Savannah asked, the words catching in her throat. Angela nodded again. Yes, I signed a non-disclosure contract. It was sealed through a Boston-based private reproductive firm. I was to carry their embryo, deliver it, and walk away with enough money to paint for the rest of my life. Brandon crossed his arms. And yet you stayed. Angela looked at him, eyes full of conflict. The pregnancy changed everything. I felt life growing inside me, and it was more than biology. I felt movement, emotion, soul. But I stayed the course, until the birth. She paused. They told me there was a complication, that there had been a split in the embryo. Twins. But one had died at birth. Brandon stiffened. And you believed that? Angela's voice broke for the first time. I wanted to believe it, because the alternative, that someone had taken my child and erased him. I wasn't strong enough to carry that truth then. Savannah stared at the floor. Her entire life had been couture gowns, front-row runways, and charity galas. Now it all felt like silk wrapped around deception. I gave birth at a private estate outside Boston, Angela continued. It wasn't a hospital. It was a compound, clinical but secretive. I never saw a death certificate. I never held either of them. Brandon moved to the vanity. He picked up Savannah's bridal hairpin, still glittering with crystals, and placed it down gently. Then Charles came back into my life, Angela said. Months later, alone. He claimed he'd left politics, divorced Celeste, and wanted to offer me protection, a new beginning, a partnership. Savannah frowned. And you believed him? Angela looked her daughter in the eye. I wanted to. He made me believe I was chosen, that Savannah needed a mother who could give her poise, elegance, depth, that I could shape her legacy. Savannah's voice rose, trembling. So I was a project? No, Angela said quickly. You were never that. I loved you. I raised you. But I see now, Charles chose me not for love, but for containment. Brandon turned to face them both. And me? Angela's eyes filled. I didn't know you were alive, Brandon. I swear to God I didn't. If I had known, I would have burned every dollar to find you. He didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and typed something quickly into a hidden app. An encrypted server opened. He navigated to a folder labeled Orchid Archives. A few swipes later, he tapped a document and held the screen up for them both to see. The title read, Delivery Confirmation, 2 Healthy Infants. Date, August 19th, 1993. Time, 5:47. AM Facility, St. Marin Private Birth Lodge, Concord, MA Note. Twins, A and B stable, male, male. No complications. Transferred per directives. Angela's knees buckled. Savannah reached out instinctively to steady her. Brandon stepped back. I found that 3 years ago. It was buried in a corrupted subdomain from one of Charles's old firms. I didn't know what it meant until today. Angela took the phone with trembling hands. They never told me. They never let me see you. They told me you were gone. You believed a man who bought silence, Brandon said coldly. And you let me grow up in shadows. Angela looked up at him, fierce despite the pain. Don't you think I paid for that? Every time I looked at Savannah, I saw the ghost of a boy I was told never existed. I was forced to love one child while pretending another never drew breath. Silence. Savannah sat on the chaise, numb. Brandon looked out the window again. Angela spoke gently. I never knew you two would meet, that you would fall in love. Brandon replied, and yet we did, in full view of the world. Angela shook her head slowly. Charles wanted Savannah to be the symbol of perfection. But you were the accident he buried. Brandon whispered, the accident who built an empire. Angela stood. I need to find out who signed that delivery note. Someone lied. Someone still knows. Savannah whispered, and if they knew, what else are they hiding? Angela looked at both of them. Then we find out. Together. In the days that followed, the world around Brandon Hall blurred like a dream, slowly unraveling. The media called it the wedding blackout. Newscasters speculated. Blogs dissected every second of the screen flicker. Shareholders panicked. Even in silence, the story grew teeth. But for Brandon, it wasn't about the world anymore. It was about the ghost that had always been whispering inside him. He hadn't told anyone what haunted his sleep as a child. The same recurring dream. A girl in white, laughing beside a lake. He never saw her face, but every night she'd vanish into the fog. And every morning he'd wake up with her voice on the tip of his tongue. Familiar, like someone he should have known. Only now did he realize. The girl looked like Savannah. Desperate for answers, Brandon boarded a private jet to Enugu, accompanied only by one bodyguard and a sealed file from the Massachusetts facility that birthed his story. He arrived at Rose Hill Retreat, a quiet retirement home tucked among cassava fields and red clay roads. The air smelled of hibiscus and afternoon rain. There, in a sun-washed corner room, he found her. Mama Doris, his first caregiver, 90 years old now, fragile in body, but her eyes still sharp with the weight of forgotten truths. She stared at him for a long time, blinking as if confirming he was real. "I knew this day would come," she whispered. Brandon sat beside her, heart pounding. "Do you remember me?" "I never forgot you, Brandon. You had the loudest cry in the nursery," she said, smiling softly, "and the saddest eyes I'd ever seen." He showed her a photo of Angela from the 90s. She nodded. "She came once, in a scarf and sunglasses. Didn't speak a word, just stood across the playground and watched you cling to the fence. When you ran to her, she turned and walked away." Brandon swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "They paid us to stay quiet." "But some silences never leave you," she replied. "She wasn't just a visitor. She was your mother. I could feel it." Back in Lagos, Savannah stood in her father's office, its walls lined with photographs of brand launches, runways, and smiling presidents. She didn't bother to sit. "Tell me the truth," she said. Charles Monroe didn't look up from his desk. "You already know it." "Tell me anyway," she insisted. He sighed. "I did what was necessary, for the brand, for our future." "You turned my life into a press release," she said bitterly. Charles finally looked up. "And it worked. You became everything I couldn't be. Everything I lost." Savannah's hands shook. "You erased a child. You lied to Mum, to me, to Brandon. Why?" Charles stood, his voice low but sharp. "Because no one invests in chaos. I built Monroe Luxury on the myth of perfection. I couldn't afford to split it with ghosts." She stared at him, the man who had chosen image over integrity. Outside, news tickers ran in red. Monroe stocks drop 12% amid family scandal. Back in Enugu, Brandon sat beneath an almond tree, staring into the past. His entire empire, every line of code, every breakthrough, every contract, was built on a name he never chose. Was his rise destiny, or the algorithm of a lie? He boarded his jet in silence. That evening, as Lagos dimmed under rain clouds, Brandon returned to his penthouse in Eco-Atlantic. He found Savannah waiting. No makeup, no press team, just her. "You disappeared," she said. "I needed to see where I came from." Savannah nodded, eyes red. "Did you find it?" "I'm not sure yet," he said. Then he paused. "Did you know?" Tears welled up. "No. I swear, Brandon. I didn't know anything until that screen lit up. I would never have let this happen." He studied her face, the pain, the confusion. She looked like the girl in his dreams, and the woman who now felt like someone else entirely. "I can't go back to before," he said softly. "I know." She reached for his hand. He let her hold it, but not tightly. That night, Brandon logged into his company's internal portal and submitted an emergency statement. Effective immediately, Brandon Hall is stepping down as CEO of Halltech Global. Reason: personal ethical conflict. He turned off his phone. The world would react how it chose. Hours later, in the quiet of his study, a notification blinked on his encrypted server. One new voice memo. Unlisted number. He clicked. A filtered voice, distorted, genderless, played through his speakers. "You're not the only one," Charles hid, "and you're not the first." The voice memo ended, leaving Brandon in a silence deeper than any storm he had weathered. The words echoed like prophecy. "You're not the only one," Charles hid, "and you're not the first." He sat motionless, the glow from his screen washing his face in cold blue. A few keystrokes later, the metadata traced the file back to a secure Ethiopian server. Addis Ababa. Coordinates attached. An address? Alam Research Institute. No public listing. No directory presence. Just a name buried in donation logs and private school endowments. 2 days later, Brandon boarded a jet under a false itinerary. He didn't tell his board. He didn't tell Savannah. Not until he was already in the air. Her reply came just 10 minutes before landing. "I'm coming too. We have to face this together, even if we don't leave whole." They didn't fly together. They weren't whole. Addis Ababa greeted them with thin air and bright sun. The city was a labyrinth of contrast, ultra-modern towers beside thousand-year-old ruins, street vendors selling roasted coffee beside electric scooters, humming past. The address led Brandon through winding hills to a secluded valley where the Alam Research Institute stood hidden in plain sight. From a distance, it looked like an elite boarding school. Granite walls, glass labs, manicured grounds. But inside, it pulsed with innovation. Clean energy labs, drone testing bays, greenhouse tech stacked in terraced rows. It wasn't just a school. It was a revolution. And at its center was Mason. He met Brandon in a rooftop greenhouse surrounded by climbing plants and panels of filtered sun. Mason stood tall, lean, almost haunting in his stillness. He wore no suit, just a linen shirt and dark slacks. His eyes were gray-green and unreadable. "You're the one who got the world," Mason said without introduction. "I got the blueprint." Brandon extended a hand. "Brandon Hall. I didn't know about you until last week." Mason didn't shake, but he knew about both of us. There was a pause. The air between them felt ancient, inherited. "He was your father too?" Brandon asked. "Biologically, yes. Strategically, no," Mason said. "He left me and my mother in Nairobi with a promise and a check. I was 5. I never saw him again." "And you built this?" Brandon asked, eyes scanning the sprawling facility. "Out of spite," Mason replied. "And necessity. I wasn't going to be another forgotten experiment in his legacy." Brandon smiled bitterly. Seams were all remnants of something Charles tried to bury. Savannah arrived 2 hours later, breathless from the journey, but regal even in fatigue. When she saw Mason, her body stilled. They looked alike, too alike, same jawline, same gaze that seemed to measure and discard you in the same breath. She stepped forward. "I'm Savannah," she said gently. "I know who you are," Mason replied. "Your face is everywhere, literally. My lab team uses your fashion firm's AI modeling tech to test silhouette recognition." "You've watched my life," she said, stunned. "No," he replied. "I studied it, to make sure I never became it." The 3 siblings sat in the inner courtyard of the Institute as the Ethiopian sun dipped behind copper-colored clouds. The conversation was slow, careful, unfolding like a fragile manuscript. Mason recounted a life built on talent and anger. Raised by a mother too proud to beg, too strong to crumble, he'd won scholarships across continents and built a multi-billion-dollar portfolio in renewable innovation by the time he turned 30. But even in success, something gnawed at him. "He named me," Mason revealed, "when I was born, before he vanished. My mother told me that. Then he cut me out of his life like I was a miscalculation." Savannah looked away. Brandon watched Mason closely. "Why did you hide your identity?" Brandon asked. "Because I knew one day he'd come crawling back, or his empire would," Mason said. "And I needed leverage. Quiet leverage." Brandon's voice hardened. "You want revenge?" "No," Mason replied calmly. "I want extinction. I want the Monroe Hall dynasty to crumble so thoroughly that no child is ever branded before they're born." "And us?" Savannah asked. "What about your siblings?" "I didn't come here for siblings," Mason said. "I came to watch the house burn." They left with more questions than answers. Savannah stayed behind to speak with Mason, hoping for something. Closure, maybe. Brandon returned to his guest quarters alone. That night, under Ethiopian stars, Brandon unlocked his laptop to check his firm's market dashboard. Then, the alert came. Priority notice. Ownership transfer confirmed. Zenith Cloud Systems. He froze. Zenith Cloud, his largest competitor, the one firm couldn't afford to lose to. Then the secondary alert. New majority shareholder, Mason Tech Holdings. The message was clear. Mason hadn't just refused the reunion. He had declared war. By dawn, the siege had begun. Haltech's share price dipped 3% at opening. By midday, it was down 12%. Not from scandal, from precision acquisition. Mason moved like a ghost in the system, silent, calculated, absolute. Through shell holdings based in Nairobi, Luxembourg, and Hong Kong, he had quietly acquired a controlling interest in Zenith Cloud, Haltech's primary competitor. And now, he had initiated a shadow merger with a Dubai-based venture capital firm with deep oil and data roots. It wasn't just corporate warfare. It was a legacy reset. Brandon stared at his dashboard in disbelief. He had built Haltech from nothing but sleepless nights and buried pain, crafted it like a cathedral of code, each product a prayer, each innovation a rebellion. Now it was being absorbed, one vote at a time. His co-founders were fracturing. Some admired Mason's renewable innovation model, leaner, more sustainable. Others feared his ruthlessness. "You can't outmaneuver someone who doesn't want your crown, Gregory," Brandon's mentor told him. "He doesn't want what you built. He wants to unmake it." Meanwhile, Savannah received an anonymous package at her Lagos penthouse. Inside, a sleek tablet with one file. No sender ID, no timestamp. It was a video. Charles Monroe, seated in a dark, paneled room. Mid-50s, alone. He looked into the camera, as if rehearsing something not meant for the public eye. Savannah was never meant to be real. She was a message, a promise to investors, a Monroe face built for the digital age. She was my clean slate, my proof that family could be engineered. The video ended. No further explanation. Savannah sat still for minutes, her breath slow, her hands clenched. Then, without hesitation, she deleted the file. The next morning, Savannah entered her office at the Midtown Tech Fashion Incubator. A single decision etched into her mind. The Monroe name would never stand on another one of her designs. She filed the paperwork that afternoon. Savannah Monroe would now operate under her birth initials only, SCA. She began sketching again, without a boardroom, without a brand brief, just pencil and paper. That evening, Savannah and Brandon met in secret at Tarqua Bay, far from press drones and boardroom shadows. The waves crashed softly. The sky hung purple, sun melting into dusk. They sat on a weathered bench, overlooking the water, dressed in plain clothes like two strangers on a quiet date. Savannah broke the silence. "He called me a message, like I was some AI script he designed to fix his failures." Brandon nodded. "He called me an error, then hid me like bad code." They watched the waves for a long time. "We were his brand," Brandon said finally, "not his children." "Then maybe it's time we start designing our own," she whispered. But as they returned to their worlds, the war deepened. Brandon received word that Mason had hacked the Monroe private server, a backup system hosted in Iceland for tax protection. The hack revealed something none of them had expected. A buried file, buried so deep even Charles's CFO hadn't known it existed. Product Line Zeta. Artificial Fertility Intelligence. Brandon opened the documents with shaking hands. It wasn't just surrogacy. It was a system, a network of AI-generated genome pairings, optimized emotional temperament, memory implantation protocols, and behavioral conditioning models. Charles Monroe hadn't just created children. He had been engineering the future of legacy itself. Thousands of files, some labeled Trial 1A, others marked Nairobi Variant. One read Savannah Beta Model V2.7. Brandon stared at it. Savannah wasn't just a brand asset. She had been intentionally designed. He called her immediately. Within an hour, she was at her lab. Her AI lead, Ifedayo, had already begun running background integrity scans. The data was real, and older than Savannah herself. But Ifedayo looked pale when she turned around from her workstation. "There's more," she whispered. "Something is actively syncing with your biometric profile." Savannah's heartbeat quickened. "What do you mean?" Ifedayo pulled up a new screen. "Facial recognition results." "There's a match in the system," she said, eyes locked on Savannah. "Another face, similar structure, similar DNA sequence, but not Brandon, and not Mason." Savannah leaned in. Her reflection danced in the monitor. "If it's not them?" Ifedayo hesitated, then said, "Then there's someone else. With your face." The match was indisputable. The AI didn't hesitate, didn't stutter. Savannah's biometric profile, cross-referenced across encrypted genome banks, social facial scans, and suppressed fertility trial data, returned one result. Harper Adley, 31 years old, bakery owner, Accra, Ghana. A photo loaded beside her name. Savannah gasped. It was like staring into a parallel version of herself. Same bone structure, same almond eyes, even the same birthmark beneath the left collarbone. But this Harper didn't wear couture or walk red carpets. She wore flower-stained aprons and gold-rimmed glasses. She smiled with her whole face, as though life had given her something other than boardroom betrayals and curated lies. Within 24 hours, Savannah was on a private jet to Accra. She wasn't alone. Brandon came, silent but watchful. Mason arrived last, skeptical, arms crossed, not out of curiosity, but strategy. He didn't trust another Monroe fingerprint in the world. They traveled in silence, 3 children of chaos flying toward a woman who might complete the puzzle, or crack it further. The bakery sat in a quiet district just outside East Legon. It was called Memory Crumbs. Inside, the air smelled of cardamom and butter. Light jazz played from an old radio. Glass cases held vanilla cream buns and lemon-laced bread loaves. And behind the counter stood Harper. She looked up and blinked as the trio entered, as if her dreams had stepped into her waking life. Her eyes landed on Savannah first. "I knew you'd come," she said softly. "I've been seeing you in pieces. Since I was 9. They sat at a small round table near the window, with cups of ginger tea between them. Brandon and Mason said little. Savannah tried to find words, but failed. Harper didn't hesitate. "I was born in a clinic I don't remember, but I remember the lights, cold, white. And I remember a woman's hand, soft, trembling, placing a bracelet on my wrist." Savannah leaned forward. "What bracelet?" Harper pulled up her sleeve. A thin line of skin showed where something once pressed for years. "They took me when I was 4. Told my parents there were complications. They signed papers they didn't understand. I was flown to a facility in Senegal. Monitored, logged. One of many." "One of what?" Mason asked, voice sharp. "Trial subjects," Harper said. "The Zeta series, artificial fertility intelligence. They weren't just testing how to make children. They were testing how to predict them." Brandon's hand clenched around his tea. "And how did you get here?" Harper glanced at the counter, where a young staff member quietly rang up a customer. "When I was 10, a woman came to the facility. She wasn't staff. She pretended to be. She had a soft accent, Nigerian, I think. She told me to hide in the laundry van the next morning." Savannah leaned in. "Do you know who she was?" Harper shook her head. "She never said. But she had this chain, silver with a tiny comb charm. She kissed my forehead and called me Hope. Said I was never meant to be part of the Monroe machine." Brandon exchanged a glance with Savannah. "Angela's sister, Camille. She disappeared in 2003. Harper's eyes softened. "She saved me. I've been here ever since, changing names, baking, dreaming." Mason finally spoke. "And what do you want from us?" Harper blinked. "Nothing." "Nothing," Mason repeated. "I don't want legacy, or war, or DNA-fueled companies. I just want to exist, quietly, kindly, without being someone's asset or experiment." Savannah studied her face, her own face, in another life. "We're twins?" she asked hesitantly. Harper nodded. Genetically, yes. The lab logs proved it. AI-engineered embryo, split in vitro. 2 viable seeds. 2 lives, 2 paths. And Brandon and Mason? Savannah asked. Harper shook her head. No blood relation. But I've dreamed of all 3 of you. Since childhood. Brandon furrowed his brow. Dreamed how? Harper stood, walked to a back room, and returned with a weathered journal. She placed it on the table and opened to a page sketched with charcoal drawings. One showed a wedding altar, another a cathedral with flickering lights. The last was a girl falling through a screen, swallowed by static. I don't know how I knew, Harper whispered, but it's always been there. They stared in silence. The air felt sacred now. Like Harper had walked between the timelines, they were still trying to reconcile. As the sun dipped into the Ghanaian skyline, casting golden streaks across the bakery floor, Harper excused herself to fetch something. She returned moments later with a small wooden drawer. From it, she pulled out a tiny, chipped porcelain ring, pale pink with a floral swirl. Savannah gasped. That's mine, she whispered. I dropped it at the old Monroe estate when I was 7. During my birthday party. I cried for days. Harper held it between her fingers like a relic. I found it buried in a shoe under my childhood bed. I didn't know what it was, but I kept it, for years. I always felt it meant something. Savannah's eyes filled with tears. How did it find its way to you? Brandon asked. Harper looked at them, her voice soft as a hymn. I think the woman who saved me left it, as a message. Mason stood abruptly and walked outside. The wind carried in the scent of flower and fate. Harper turned to Savannah, gently placing the ring in her hand. You weren't meant to lose this, she said, just like I wasn't meant to disappear. The elevator hummed as it rose in eerie silence, each floor of Charles Monroe's Victoria Island penthouse echoing like a mausoleum of ambition. Brandon stepped out alone. No press, no board members, just him, the master key he had stolen from Charles's encrypted vault, and a question that had been growing louder in his mind. How deep did the design go? He wandered past portraits of presidents and rare vases displayed like trophies. But it was the unmarked panel at the end of the hallway, tucked behind a custom painting of the Monroe family crest, that gave him pause. He removed the painting. Behind it, a retinal scanner blinked. He leaned in, scanned. Click. The wall shifted. Inside, a cold blue room came alive. Screens, prototypes, archives, patents. Not just documents, but intentions. The walls were lined with unpublished genetic patents, labeled Monroe Iterative Model, Genomic Personality Integration. Blueprints revealed a project codenamed ThroneNet, a network of simulated genetic heirs, avatars born from AI, historic profiles, psychological optimization, and political forecasting. Brandon moved through the space, scanning through files. Zeta v4.9, Political Influence Integration. Echo Frame Savannah Model 2.0, Public Grace Protocol enabled. Harper Variant, Eco Leader Potential, Agricultural Focus 92%. Mason Frame, Diplomatic Strategist, UN Pathway Algorithm. Each file was more terrifying than the last. Charles hadn't raised children. He had raised options, not people, power avatars. Savannah arrived 20 minutes later, led in by Brandon's silent text, "Come now, no press, just truth." She stopped at the threshold of the room. Her eyes scanned the monitors. Her face drained of warmth. One screen played a simulation, her voice, her mannerisms, delivering a keynote speech at Davos. Except, she'd never said those words. "What is this?" she whispered. Brandon pulled up the file. Digital Savannah 2.0, Preloaded Ethics Scenarios, Fashion Diplomacy, Scandal Response, Legacy Diversion. Savannah backed away, horrified. He made a version of me? Brandon nodded. Savannah's face trembled. And it's better, stronger, calmer, more obedient. No, Brandon replied. It's hollow. Mason entered moments later, escorted by Brandon's head of security. He walked through the room like a storm on ice, cold, assessing, contained. Then he saw his file. Mason simulation, West African policy influencer, anti-legacy disruption narrative enabled. He barked a hollow laugh. He built a pacified version of me. That's rich. Savannah pointed to the ceiling-high server towers. We were never meant to be heirs, she said. We were test cases. Mason stared at the screens. Burn it. Brandon didn't wait. He walked over to the mainframe, typed in the override code he once saw Charles use. The screens flickered. Password denied. He typed in again, this time using Angela's maiden name, Moncrief Adele. Override granted. The system began collapsing in real time, files purging, simulations glitching, blueprints disassembling. One by one, the avatars vanished. Except for one, Harper. Her face lingered longer than the others, smiling softly, holding a loaf of bread, standing in a digital wheat field. The final screen displayed a prompt. Harper variant, active connection, Shanghai Lab 17. And then, it too went dark. The next morning, Harper was gone. Her room in Savannah's guest wing was neatly made. No sign of struggle, no scent of panic. But on the kitchen counter sat a loaf of bread, still warm. Carved into the crust with a small paring knife were 3 words. Stay soft, remember. Savannah stood in silence, holding the bread as tears rimmed her eyes. She's running again, she whispered, or someone's pulling her away. Brandon checked the compound's security system. No logs, no footage, no exit. Mason stood behind them, arms crossed. She didn't leave, he said. She was extracted. Hours later, Savannah stood alone in her private tech lab, going through the encrypted drives Brandon had copied before purging the servers. She plugged one in, her heart still aching, her mind still fogged. The screen lit up. The AI assistant greeted her. Welcome, Savannah. Reviewing last profile access? A spinning wheel. Then, match found. Harper Adley, variant 3.1 Savannah. Leaned forward. The system pinged an active location. Node, Eastern Server Cloud, region, Shanghai, China. Status, live. She stared. Harper's simulation had been rebooted. Somewhere, someone had restarted Charles's work. And they had started with Harper. They could have chosen revenge. With billions behind them, tech blueprints in hand, and global headlines still chasing their every move, the 3 siblings could have launched a new dynasty overnight. Sleeker, louder, more ruthless than Charles ever imagined. But they didn't. They scattered and rebuilt from what remained. In Nairobi, Savannah stood before a crowd of 200 young designers, developers, and data scientists inside the glass atrium of her new fashion tech incubator, SCA Labs. She wore no jewelry, no Monroe silks, just a linen suit and the confidence of someone no longer performing for a legacy that didn't belong to her. Behind her, the incubator's slogan glowed. Style is coded, identity is not. SCA Labs wasn't just about fashion. It was about using tech to protect personal identity, digitally watermark original stories, and fight algorithmic exploitation in the design world. Savannah spoke not of her scandals, not of Harper, not of Charles. She spoke of reinvention, ownership, freedom. Thousands of miles away in Lagos, Brandon stood in front of the towering Halltech building one last time. A black car waited behind him. His board had begged him to reconsider. His shareholders had offered counter-strategies. He declined them all. Inside the glass doors, a framed photo of him was being taken down, the one from Tech Day Ghana, where he unveiled the cloud-integrated motherboard that made him a legend. He smiled at it one final time, then turned away. That same week, he invested over $100 million into a global initiative called Rooted, a mental health venture for adoptees, displaced children, and adults raised without access to their real stories. Rooted didn't build empires. It built support systems. Because Brandon was done chasing avatars. He wanted healing, not headlines. Mason, ever the outlier, made headlines his own way. He formed a rogue nonprofit based in Kigali, the Inversion Fund. Its mission: expose and dismantle billionaire-controlled fertility programs and legacy engineering experiments worldwide. He released redacted versions of Charles Monroe's data vaults through a whistleblower blockchain system, partnered with investigative journalists, supported legislation on biotech transparency in 6 African nations. He didn't speak on panels. He didn't smile for magazines. He just burned the idea of designer dynasties to the ground. And then, out of nowhere, Harper returned. She didn't send a message. She just appeared, virtually, at an MIT Ethics and AI conference, wearing a minimalist saffron dress from Savannah's unreleased line. Her camera was muted, her background plain, but her name tag read Harper A. / Independent Researcher, Accra. She didn't speak, didn't present, but she was there, and that was enough. Savannah watched the live stream, hand pressed to her lips. Brandon called her seconds after. "She's watching us," he said. "No," Savannah whispered. "She's reminding us." Angela, once the face of silent elegance behind Charles's empire, stepped away from it all. She resigned from every board, returned every speaking invitation, closed her curated wardrobe. Then she opened a small community art space in the heart of Lagos, called the Echo House. It had no logo, no marble. Just white walls, open hands, and an invitation. Bring what you couldn't say. We'll paint it. We'll frame it. We'll forgive it. Survivors of identity fraud, adoptees, mothers who had lost children to science and shame. They all came. Angela greeted them at the door herself. No press, no fanfare, just redemption. 3 months later, the siblings gathered, quietly, for the soft launch of Savannah's newest platform, Born Twice. It was a digital memoir system powered by AI, designed to help people raised without access to their origins reconstruct emotional memory using poetry, simulation, and narrative prompts. People from 27 countries had already submitted entries. Brandon wrote the very first journal. "I thought the altar was the end, but it was the first door that wouldn't lie to me. The altar didn't break us. It saved us. Because love doesn't disappear when the truth shows up. If anything, that's when love finally earns its name." His words became the tagline of the platform. At the official opening gala of Born Twice, held in a reimagined cinema-turned-gallery in downtown Nairobi, Savannah stood by the entrance in a modest blue gown, greeting artists, developers, and survivors. The room was filled with portraits made from algorithmic memory, handwritten AI journals, and audio installations of real-life reflections. No mention of Charles Monroe. No photos of weddings. Just rebirth. And then she saw him, a man, tall, deliberate, wearing an obsidian suit with no tie. He moved through the crowd like he belonged, but Savannah didn't recognize him until she saw what was on his hand, Charles's signet ring. Not a replica. The real one, etched with the family crest and a tiny digital imprint, only visible under UV light. The man met her gaze and didn't blink. "Can I help you?" she asked. He smiled. "I think I'm the one who's finally here to help you." The ring was unmistakable, silver with a faint blue tint, a crest engraved in its center. The Monroe Phoenix, wings raised, not in triumph, but in rebirth. Savannah stood still, her pulse steady, her instincts sharper than ever. The man reached her gently, offering a soft nod. "My name is Nathaniel Searle," he said, "Charles's godson, executor of what he called his real will, one that was never meant for lawyers." Savannah didn't flinch. "I didn't know he had a godson," she replied. Nathaniel smiled, not with charm, but weariness. "Not many did. I wasn't part of his empire. I was part of his regret." They sat in the rear garden of the gallery, where light pooled softly over glass art installations that shimmered like broken dreams turned beautiful. Nathaniel pulled out a small black chip from his jacket and slid it across the table. "A digital archive," he said. "Not a tribute, not a justification, just what he never wanted anyone to see. Letters, failed prototypes, abandoned simulations, and a diary." Brandon arrived a few minutes later, followed by Mason, both cautious. Nathaniel remained calm. "I don't want his money. I've never taken it. I only want to put truth in the same place his ambition tried to erase it. Savannah turned the chip in her fingers. And you think we should show this to the world? Nathaniel nodded. Not to glorify him, but to warn others like him. Back at the Born Twice creative room, Savannah and Brandon huddled with their team. Brandon's voice was quiet, but firm. We build a new exhibit. A rotating one. Temporary. Called the Ashes Room. Curated failure, Savannah added. A space where people can see the cost of unchecked power. Mason didn't like it. He doesn't deserve a wall. Or a voice. He should disappear. He already tried that, Brandon replied. And look what it created. Savannah placed a hand on Mason's arm. This isn't for him. It's for everyone he tried to replicate, to erase, to design. Mason walked out without another word. At the official launch of the Ashes Room, Angela stepped to the center of the room. No notes, no podium. She looked at the crowd, all gathered between projected images of Charles's unreleased patents, footage of early trial labs, and the abandoned framework of Savannah 2.0. I used to call myself a victim, she began. But I wasn't. I was a curator of silence. I chose not to ask questions. I chose the polished floor instead of the truth. I chose my daughter's illusion over her freedom. She paused, her voice never faltering. No more. Weeks later, Born Twice hosted its first anonymous healing retreat in the rolling hills of northern Rwanda. No guest names, no media, no photos, just one prompt. Bring the name you were never allowed to say. Participants arrived with slips of paper, names whispered into fire, names written into sand and let go into the river, names carved into soft clay and left to harden in the sun. Brandon stood beneath the moon, listening to stories that blurred the line between fiction and memory. Savannah walked the paths, reading letters nailed to trees. Not curated, just real. Mason never came, but he sent a satellite donation to fund the next 5 retreats. Angela stayed for 3 days, painting memories in the art tent, scenes from her youth she never allowed herself to remember, until now. Then came the message, encrypted, untraceable. No return address. From Harper. Brandon and Savannah opened it together on the same bench at Tarqua Bay, where everything had first begun to crack. A video. Harper's voice, soft as ever, but stronger now. She stood against a backdrop of green cliffs and Buddhist prayer flags fluttering in the wind. Bhutan is peaceful, she said. People here ask fewer questions, but they listen more. I'm okay. She looked into the camera. Tell Savannah. I remember now. The lights always flickered before the truth came. The screen faded to black. 1 year later, in Zanzibar, a quiet villa stood on the edge of the sea. No press, no drones, no photographers, just string lights swaying in the ocean breeze, white flowers resting in glass jars, a soft violin playing a tune written by a composer Brandon had once supported through Rooted. Savannah stood beneath a palm leaf arch, not in Monroe white, but in sunset gold, her hair braided and adorned with sea pearls. Across from her stood a man, not Brandon, not Mason, not anyone the world would care to name. But he held her hand like it was the only legacy worth keeping. He was a therapist, a poet, someone who had no fortune, no platform, no agenda, just love. The vows were short, true. When they kissed, the guests stood barefoot in the sand and clapped softly. Angela watched from the back, hand in Brandon's. Mason sent a single rose. Harper mailed a hand-carved bread knife engraved with, "May you only cut what you can nourish." As the priest finished the ceremony, he gestured to the back wall of the beach altar, where a projection screen had been set up, out of habit or maybe hope. But it remained blank, untouched, and as the music swelled and the wind kissed the shore, no image came. No slideshow, no glitch, no legacy, just now, just love. And this time, the screen behind them stayed black, as it should. If this story gripped your heart and made you question everything about love, legacy, and identity, don't just watch. Be part of the journey. Hit the like button, Subscribe for more cinematic Nigerian billionaire dramas, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if the screen at your wedding showed a secret from your past? Your voice matters here.